Okay, we will get started. So good evening and welcome to our public meeting for the building fee review. The purpose of this meeting is to provide the opportunity for input on the proposed recommendation. And this meeting is being held pursuant to Section 7 of the Building Code Act. Just for awareness, this meeting is being recorded and we'll upload it to YouTube later. It is not being live streamed right now. Just a reminder that there's no final decisions at this time, and the recommendations being discussed tonight will come forward to council on April 27th. And at this time, I will turn it over to Stefan from Hempson to give his presentation. And then we have two registered speakers. And if anyone else would like to speak, they're welcome to do so at the end as well. So.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Stefan Jetranovic. I'm a partner at Hempson Consulting. We've been retained by the town to undertake two studies. What I'm speaking about this evening is the first of those two, and it relates to building permit fees. And as you heard, this is a sort of a statutory public meeting being held under the Building Code Act, which is required prior to town council making any changes to these fees. So just to be clear, these are fees that are imposed to recover the costs of reviewing construction drawings and conducting inspections during building construction that the town's responsible for as the administrator of the building code. I think I need you to forward the slides, right? Yes, thank you. So I'm gonna take about 12 to 13 minutes, but I just wanted to summarize the cost of the operation, the building code operation that we're looking to pay for through these fees, and the fee revenues associated with the service. And then I'll show you the fees the town could impose to recover those costs. And we'll see how those fees stack up against the fees that are currently in place and the fees that other municipalities in the region charge as well. And all the information you see on the screen is set out in more detail in a report that was released last month, and that report's on the town's website. And then we'll finish up with a bit of Q&A. Next slide, please. So just the legislative basis for what we're doing here is under the Building Code Act. And you can see on the top left there, that's what the Building Code Act says that you can impose the fees for. I won't repeat it, but basically, as I said, it's the plans reviews, inspections, and enforcement during that period of building construction. There's a public process that's required before any changes to these fees take place. And that's what this public meeting is for. And notice of the public meeting went out on March the 6th, which is more than 21 days in advance. And then the information that's required, as I say, is set out in our report. There's no right of appeal of these fees. So unlike the second part of our retainer, which will deal with the planning and development fees, where there is a right of appeal to the land tribunal, there's no right of appeal for these fees. What the town is required to do, if you look on the right, under this regulation, it does have to annually report on its costs and the fee revenues it raises in an annual report. And you can see that those reports have to distinguish between the direct cost of service, the indirect cost of service, and then any funds that the town has in its building permit fee reserve fund. And I'll deal with each one of those three components in the coming slides. Next slide, please. So here, just wanted to lay out what the cost of this operation is to Grimsby. So we've looked at costs over the next 5 years. We don't really want to do this exercise every year, so we're looking at costs over a 5-year period. And the average annual cost of the operation is around $865,000. Right now, there are 5 full-time staff involved in the fee reviews. And given the amount of growth that Grimsby is planning for, which is quite considerable under the official plan and its infrastructure plans, we estimate that towards the end of that period, an additional staff is going to be required, a permit coordinator. So that's been factored into the analysis. And you can see, if you look at the pie chart on the left of that $865,000, about 2/3 of that is related to staff salaries. And then in the gold component, that's That's covering the operating costs of the department, including the vehicles that are used for the inspections. And then the gray and the red components of the pie chart, those are the indirect costs. And so those are costs that are incurred by the corporate departments of the municipality to support the building division operation. So that's going to pick up costs like IT support and finance and HR and legal and insurance and that sort of thing. And then finally, there's that space component as well, which is just sort of keeping the lights on in the offices and that kind of thing. And then the black component of the pie chart is a provision included in the fees to ensure that the reserve fund is maintained at an appropriate level. And I'll speak a little bit about that in a second as we get towards the end. Next slide, please. So that's the sort of the cost side of things. And then we also sort of need to understand the kinds of revenues that might be raised under the current fee rates to see whether they're sufficient to pay for those costs. And so if you just look at the top line of figures there, that shows you the revenue that's been raised from building permit fees over the last 5 years. And I guess, you know, the most obvious thing is you can see it goes up and down quite substantially from one year to the next. So, you know, this revenue stream fluctuates with construction cycles and, you know, what goes on any given year. And, you know, on average, it's about $600,000 that's raised. But, you know, in 2021, 2023, they're about 60% below that. So in those years, they did not collect enough revenue to pay for the operation. And then in 2022 and 2025 in particular, the town overcollected compared to the cost of the operation. And so this is why it has a reserve fund. This is why municipalities need these reserve funds. In years where there's a surplus, you sequester the funds in the reserve fund. And in years where you don't have the funds, you don't have to draw on the tax levy. You can draw from the reserve fund to pay for the operation. That's sort of the theory behind having a reserve fund. And then the second row of figures there shows you the revenue projection under the current fee rates with the growth that is being planned for moving forward. And what you can see is that, you know, it's fairly, it incrementally increases per year. And the reason for that is the sort of growth trajectory of the town, recognizing we're in a quite a slow growth period right now. But, you know, this growth trajectory is certainly consistent with the official plan work that's been done and the infrastructure plans of the town. So we haven't sort of departed from that through this exercise. Next slide, please. So when we compare the two, we see that the full cost is $865,000. It's all in current dollars. And the average annual revenue under the current fee rates is $727,000. There's a difference there. There's a shortfall there of $138,000. And so the town, under the Building Code Act, could increase its fees by 19% to cover that gap. Now, I just want to be clear, it's under no obligation to do so. But without the increase, it will in fact be subsidizing this operation through the tax levy. There is no other funding source to pay for these kinds of costs. The next slide, please. So we've done a fairly extensive benchmarking exercise. Really, we want to understand how the new fee rates and the current fee rates compare to what other municipalities charge, recognizing that, you know, this is a pretty standardized operation. There's not too much difference between how municipalities, you know, conduct these kinds of, provide these kinds of services. But a couple of things to note before I show you the next slide when you see the comparisons. First of all, these comparisons say nothing about the standard of service that you get in any one municipality. So one municipality may have higher fees, but they're providing you with a permit twice as quickly. So it doesn't say anything about the standard of service you're getting. And the second thing is that there may be a number of municipalities, particularly in Niagara region, that have low fees because they're not charging full cost recovery fees, either because they haven't done a study in years or they do it as a matter of policy. But don't assume that other municipalities have low rates because magically they can produce the same service at a lower cost. It doesn't quite work that way. Next slide, please. And I suppose I somewhat apologize for having so many figures on one slide, but again, it's a lot more detailed in the report, and I just felt it was important to tell the overall story. We can talk about details if there are questions. Just one final point before I get into some of these figures. The town hasn't actually indexed its building permit fees for the last 2 years, which means that of the 19% increase that we have identified, only about 13 or 14% of that is actually related to bridging the gap. About 5 or 6% of that is actually catching up on inflationary increases that have occurred over the last couple of years. So the effective fee increase, to use sort of finance terms, is more like 13 or 14%. So what this table does here on the left there is these are classifications under the building code of different building types, assembly buildings, the sort of large hospital kinds of things, institutional buildings, residential buildings, business and personal services, which is offices, mercantile, which would be commercial, retail, industrial, and then the alterations and renovations. And the first column of figures are the fees per square foot that are charged for all those different types of building types. And I bolded the residential because that's overwhelmingly the biggest revenue generator. So that's the one that really matters to get right. And then the second column of figures is the fees that could be imposed with a 19% increase. And then the third column of figures is the median fee of all the benchmarked municipalities that I showed you in the previous slide. And then we have the minimum fee of all those municipalities and the maximum fee of all those municipalities. So I guess if we just look at the current fees, first of all, the current fees are either the lowest of all the benchmark range or very near the lowest. So if you look at assembly, institutional, for example, the first two lines, they are the minimum. And the residential is, I think, second lowest. Or if they're not at the lowest or very near the lowest, they're at or below the median. So the key takeaway here is that the town's current fees are quite low in the general context. The full cost recovery fees are very close to the median fees. Some are slightly above, some are slightly below. And the office and commercial retail and the industrial and the alterations and renovations, so the bottom 4 rows there are actually a little bit higher than the median. So, I mean, that's comforting to see that even at full cost recovery, the town is quite competitive with other municipalities. And just a reminder that not all other municipalities are charging full cost recovery. Next slide, please. So just on the reserve fund matter, so the current reserve fund balance, and we're talking year end 2025 here, is around $1.5 million. Because of the slowdown we're currently in, the town is actually funding a lot of its operations from that reserve fund. It's being depleted at quite a clip, to be honest. And the 2026 budget projects a draw of the reserve fund of around $472,000. So, you know, that reserve fund is projected to be about $1 million by the end during the 2026 year. We think the reserve fund target should be around about 1.5 million, 1.4 million actually. And that's a fairly standard target for municipalities. And particularly in Grimsby, where you remember those fluctuations from one year to the next are quite substantial, we would say the minimum you would want is a $1.4 million reserve fund. And in order to achieve that over the next 5 years, an annual transfer to the fund from the fee revenues of around $63,000 is required. So that's that 11% in the pie chart earlier that's incorporated in the 19% increase. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to finish off with a summary of our recommendations in our report. The first recommendation is that we think that this kind of service lends itself to a full cost recovery approach. The beneficiaries of this service are very easy to identify. They're people who need building permits that are going to benefit their own properties. There's no reason not to impose a full cost recovery fee on that basis. It's a very equitable approach, unlike perhaps some other fees that the municipality charges. The second would be to introduce, for the most part, the fees capture all of the work that's done by the department, but there are one or two areas where a service is provided and a fee isn't charged. And there are some fees, particularly on the enforcement side, that need beefing up. These are very minor changes. They don't generate a lot of revenue. So these are very, as I say, minor recommendations. Third one would be to index the fees annually, because when you don't index, you fall behind. And if it's persistent, it can cause sort of broader financial issues. The fourth and the fifth bullet are recommendations that relate to the internal corporate financial management of the municipality, and they are intended to review the way the municipality allocates indirect costs to the department and really trying to improve the transparency of that activity and to ensure that the building permit fees only fund building code related costs. And then finally, to make sure you monitor your benchmarks against other municipalities so you always know where you stand. And then in 5 years' time, you will want to undertake a similar review to make sure things are aligned again. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer. I think there are delegations, but I'm happy to answer questions in whatever order you want me to.
Sure. Why don't we do the two delegations, and then if there's open forum questions, we could do that after. Is that okay?
That's for sure.
Mike, do you want to go first?
Left the mic on. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Mike Collins-Williams, CEO of the West End Home Builders Association. We represent 300 member companies involved in residential construction, renovation and development across the Hamilton Census metropolitan area, and we work in collaboration with our friends and colleagues at the Niagara Home Builders Association. I'm here today representing our members' concerns that increasing fees while we're in the sharpest downturn in a generation, and some would say that this is even worse than the 1990s. This increase, unfortunately, creates conditions to make it even more difficult to recover. We understand the town's need to fund services appropriately, but we have serious questions about the proposed 19% fee increase for building permit fees. It's critical to be clear about who this increase really impacts. Our industry has come to a grinding halt. New housing applications have dropped dramatically, 85% in recent years, according to the report being discussed here this evening. And yet, despite the economic conditions and the whopping 85% reduction of these types of applications, the town's proposed a 19% increase in building permit fees. I also want to ground this discussion in who the town is actually collecting fees from, by and large, because there's a common assumption that building permit fees primarily affect developers and large builders, but the data contained in this report is pointing to something else. We're in the middle of a significant downturn in residential construction. New home applications have fallen off a cliff. In fact, in 2024, there were only 17 new residential applications submitted. So if new home construction slowed to this extent, then who's applying for the permits? It's not large-scale developments, it's everyday residents. It's the homeowner who wants to build a porch. It's the family putting in a deck. It's somebody trying to add a pool or renovate part of their home. So when we talk about a 19% increase in fees, we need to be very clear. This increase is falling overwhelmingly on regular, everyday taxpayers, not developers. And it's happening at a time when affordability is already a major concern to those same residents. probably a very major concern on an election year. So let me bring this back to our members. As we mentioned, the construction industry is under significant pressure. We're dealing with tariffs, elevated material and labor costs, development charges, and a steady rise in municipal fees, such as being discussed today. The cumulative effect of all of this has made conditions nearly impossible. We're seeing projects being canceled, units sitting unsold, and we're seeing massive job losses across the sector. The Altus Group has forecasted up to 100,000 job losses in our sector across the GTA and Hamilton areas, which Grimsby is a part of, over the next 5 years if the current trends are not reversed. So introducing a fee increase in this moment doesn't just add costs, it risks prolonging the downturn. It's harder for the industry to recover and puts the town further away from housing goals. There's also a fundamental question of logic here that we think deserves attention. If new residential activity has decreased by approximately 85%, how is it that the cost to administer and enforce building permits have increased to the point where a 19% hike is being proposed? That's a disconnect that's difficult to reconcile. It raises questions about whether current cost assumptions truly reflect today's level of activity and whether staffing and operational models have been or potentially need to be adjusted to match that reality. And let's also be real here. Inspecting and reviewing applications for a deck or a small renovation are a lot less complicated than a condo tower. So not only has your volume gone down, your complexity has as well. The final point I want to leave with you tonight is about the reserve fund. The report notes that approximately 7% of the building permit fee structure is intended to go towards contributions to the building permit reserve fund. It also confirms the town already has a reserve fund with a balance of about 1.5 million, or perhaps at the end of this year down to 1.1. I think that's worth pausing on. We are currently in one of the most challenging periods the residential construction industry has faced in decades. And yet at this exact moment, the proposal here is not only to increase the fees, but to do so in part to add more money to an already substantial reserve fund. That approach is impossible to justify because a reserve fund exists to manage exactly this kind of volatility. It exists to help municipalities navigate downturns without shifting sudden financial pressures onto residents. So instead of increasing fees on residents trying to improve their homes, we'd strongly urge council to consider using the reserve fund to stabilize operations during this downturn. Not as a permanent solution, but as a measured and responsible response to current conditions. The reserve fund should be reviewed as the first option, not the last. So in closing, we respectfully ask the town to consider the timing and necessity of this fee increase. And we propose to council to consider deferring this decision for 1 or 2 years to give the opportunity for this industry to recover, to find efficiencies, and to ensure that it's not just residents trying to make improvements to their home that are paying the bill. During a proposed deferral period, the town can utilize the existing reserve fund to manage the variability and protect residents during a downturn like the one we're experiencing today. I'll say that we remain committed to working collaboratively with the town to support housing supply, economic stability, and sustained growth in the community. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for your comments. Why don't you go next, Chuck, and then we can have a bit more of an informal Q&A as needed.
Quicker than Mike, he's long-winded, so. Anyways. Okay, sorry, you're gonna have to go through this because I normally start off with this. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Chuck McShane, and I'm proud to serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Niagara Home Builders Association. I would like to begin by thanking the town of Grimsby for this opportunity to speak with you this evening. Our association represents 170 member companies, builders, developers, professional consultants, and service providers who have been the voice of the home building industry and the new home purchaser in the Niagara region for more than 70 years. We're also affiliated with both the Ontario Home Builders Association and the Canadian Home Builders Association. As you know, Niagara has been at the forefront of provincial discussions around amalgamation, and the need to find cost savings for residents and businesses. At the same time, the home building industry is experiencing one of its lowest points in decades. In Grimsby, only 172 residential building permits have been issued since 2020. 172. That's in 6 years. On average, that's 29 per year. Residential units were built right here in Grimsby. Your background study projects a decline in revenues from 2025 to 2026 of approximately $200,000, with an average reduction of $130,000 per year over the proposed 5-year period. That's right in your study. This aligns with what we were seeing across the industry, a significant drop in building activity. As a result, companies have had to make the difficult adjustments to their workforce, overhead, and operating budgets. Many employees have been laid off, placed on reduced schedules, or have lost their jobs entirely. This brings me to a key question. When the town's income and workload are decreasing, why are fees increasing instead of efficiencies being found, just as every other business has been forced to do? Your own study indicates that future workloads will be reduced. If that is the case, why has the town not examined its overhead costs, staffing levels, operational efficiencies before proposing fee increases? At a time when the province is, and I'm a Niagara resident, all right, and have been all my life. At this time, the province is actively exploring amalgamation to reduce red tape and improve costs, efficiencies. And unjustified fee increases only strengthens the argument for intervention and forced change here in Niagara. Both the provincial and federal governments are working hard to make housing more affordable. We've heard in the last week the incredible announcements that have been brought forth, and we appreciate their efforts. The question now is, does the town of Grimsby want to be part of the housing solution? Raising fees at a time when the industry is struggling and without clear justification sends the wrong message to the Minister of Municipal Housing and Affairs and Housing, as well as the Premier's office. I will close with a recommendation that the town of Grimsby follow the example set by the City of Thorold just a couple of weeks ago and pause the proposed fee increase for 1 year, giving the industry time to regain stability. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Great, thank you, Chuck. So just for the purposes of the recording, if you have any questions, I just ask that you go up to the mic and then the appropriate either staff member or Stefan from Hempson can respond. Did anyone want to ask any questions? And did anyone in attendance have anything else they'd like to say? Sure. You can actually just use the mic there if you'd like.
Thank you. I'd like to know what are our neighboring municipalities charging for this same service? More or less? Like are we, can you give me an idea? So what does Lincoln charge? What does West Lincoln charge? So I have an idea. I'd like my question answered if that's all right. Thank you.
So I'll just give you a few examples, Councillor, and if you want more, I can expand more. But so for a low density, so a single detached unit, if you're building a new unit, the town currently charges $1.48 per square foot to do the building permit review. So that's review of the construction plans by the plans examiners and then inspection of the building at various stages of construction. The median.
I want to know what Lincoln charges,
Oh,
and I want to know what West Lincoln charges.
okay. That's, you're going to have to give me then a few seconds just to dig that up.
But where I'm going with this, have we been undercharging? And for that reason, not cost recovering?
So the town of Lincoln charges the same $1.48 for a single family or a semi-detached or a townhome or a duplex or a row. And then for apartments, it charges $1.51. And Grimsby, it's $1.48 across the board for all the unit types. I don't have West Lincoln. It wasn't on our list, but I have a number of other municipalities in Niagara region for you.
And I guess what I'd like to know in terms of the kinds of things that we're building, and maybe Paul, can answer this. How much of it is sort of new development versus people building fences and pools and what have you? Like, what's sort of the ratio?
So I just wanted to just make clear of, I know that discussion, sorry, Councillor, I just want to mention something that was talked about earlier, the 85% that the builders feel that the construction has been reduced over the last 5 years. I just wanted to mention that the numbers from 2016, I think, to 2019, and again, it wasn't really clear in the report, but I just want to bring it up now, was we were issuing building permits for each individual apartment unit. So for example, we had an apartment building with 207 units. So in 2019, I think it was, we ended up by, it appears that the numbers are inflated, but we were issuing individual permits for each unit. So that's how our software was set up. But as of 2020, we're issuing, just say there's one building with 150 units, that's one building permit. So I know, Michael, you were kind of focusing on that 85% decrease. So that's why it appears there's such a wide range of permits from 2015 to 2019, and then the reduction since then.
This is being recorded, so it has to be
Yeah.
fully.
And before you jump in, if we could just finish answering Councillor Vardy's question before we jump to a new question.
Relative to work,
Yeah.
I think it's less than 10%.
Okay, so yeah, Councillor Vardy, so it's, you're asking about new home builds versus the overall volume of work, roughly? So I would say probably around 10% of our volume is new home builds versus our overall permits. We don't do permits for fences, but we do for pool enclosures, signs, additions, renovations, commercial renovations, but it's probably around 10%.
And if you can help me, Paul, how does the workload vary? I mean, is the workload a lot? I'm assuming it would be a lot heavier for an apartment building than it would be a new home. Am I right?
Yeah.
Or how does that kind of work? I just want to understand it better.
Okay, so currently our minimum fee is $195, and that does like a deck or a shed or whatnot. Those are the typical fees. We so-called lose money on those because that, with the plans review, with the inspections, there's probably 3 or 4 inspections, a correspondence. So there's as much work in some of the smaller permits as there is in a residential dwelling, for example. So there may be less inspections, but the administrative part of it to do plans review, and a lot of times with homeowners, doing work themselves, we have to kind of guide them a lot more than if it was a professional, designer that brought us drawings.
Okay, so I guess what I'm wondering is 19% is a pretty big jump. But, if you're telling me your building permit is roughly $190, $195, 20% on top of that is really just another like $40. It's not really that pressing, but why not consider sort of ramping up? Just sort of do an incremental fee charge, sort of, start off with 5% and then kind of bring it up there over the next 5 years. And that might address some of the concerns from our home builders associations.
Yes, Councillor. So, certainly you have the option to do that. There's many different ways to skin that cat. But any phase in of the increase or deferral of the increase, as Thorold has done, that's going to have to be subsidized in some part from another funding source, and that will be the tax levy. So our goal with this report was to present to council what the full cost recovery fee could be, recognizing that council's ability to charge whatever it wants and implement things however it wants is full flexibility to do that.
Okay, but I still wonder a bit if we're comparing apples and oranges here in terms of what other communities are doing. Do they have the same volume? Are they dealing with the same trends? I just feel like I don't have quite enough data in all of this.
Counselor, in the appendix of the report, there is a comparison table. So I think that might help you when you're looking at it. I can send you the link, or it'll also be on the final council report. So I think that might help a little bit with comparing. It has the exact data. So
in theory, I agree people should pay what it costs, right? But I think we also have to recognize we're in a certain economic time. So maybe there's a balance in there.
okay. Counselor Frake, go ahead. Do you mind going to a mic though? Do you mind going to a mic?
For your presentations as well. I've been following this all along, and I know there's a lot of confusion around what these charges are. I want to clarify that first of all, but I also want you guys to respond to the concerns that the home builders associations have. And I think there seems to be a little bit of a difference of how you're comparing these costs and where they end up at the end. A couple of questions. I might be all over the map a bit here. So when it comes to the building department, Paul, or Sarah, do the cost of running the building department come from the tax levy, or does it all come from the fees that are collected for the various applications? That's, can you clarify that? So I just want to clarify that first of all. I'm just concerned that I just want to make sure that the taxpayer is not paying for
Okay,
this.
yeah.
It's the actual user that I'm.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah, Councillor Frake. So the Building Code Statute Act is clear across the province that, and I think Stefan mentioned it in the report, that building departments, let's call it across Ontario, should not be funded through the tax levy at all. So any of our expenses, our salaries, our vehicles, everything does not affect the tax levy. So it doesn't affect the tax levy.
Yeah, because that was one of my first concerns is that, is this going to end up being a taxpayer burden? And it's not. Now, these increases, the 19%, sounds fairly substantial. I know other municipalities are looking at this as well. And I think in a lot of cases, some of them are even more than 19%, even though I think you said Thorough was decided not to have any increase at all. So I just want to understand, you mentioned, Paul, that if it's a condo building or an apartment building with 100 units, 200 units, whatever the case might be, in the past, we were charging a fee per unit. Did I get that right? You would inspect every unit and then there would be a fee attached to every one of them. And now we're doing it a little differently by how? We're not inspecting each unit. We're doing the whole building all at once. Can you explain that to me a little more?
Okay, sorry, Councillor Frake, it might not have been clear. So no, it was just the number of permits that we issued. So whether it's a 10-unit condo or a 200-unit condo, it's based on per square footage, the entire building. But it was the number appeared to be taken as misleading for the number of permits issued. So when it said new residential from 2016 to 2019, I think it was, those numbers were elevated. I think there was 4 condo buildings over at Grimsby on the Lake in that time frame, which amounted to hundreds of units. So, but now since 2020, we issue 1 permit for a 200-unit apartment building. So
There used to be 200?
there used to be 200. So that was nothing to do with the cost of the permit. That table simply was only speaking of the number of new residential permits. We could have clarified that in the report that the from 2016 to 2019 was per dwelling unit, let's call it. And then from 2020 onward is per permit, per building. So
I think I get it. The taxes and fees would get very complicated sometimes. So I guess when I first heard about this 19% increase, my biggest concern was, the timing is just terrible. The optics are terrible. When you look at what's happening with, the feds and the province, making it more cost effective for more home building, which we're all trying to do better and encourage more of at a lesser cost, because at the end of the day, whatever costs are incurred by home builders is going to end up with the homeowner in the end. That's where it's going to end up. But I just want to make sure that we're not going to, these numbers, these costs are so prohibitive that it's going to discourage building within the town. And I don't quite have my head around that yet, but let's take an example. Let's a 200 condo building. How would you base the costs of a permit around that? I mean, how does that work? Can you just take me through it? Where does the cost come from? And how much would that be, for example? I mean,
Okay, so I'll give two examples. There's the condos, let's say there's 100 units in one building. And single family dwellings, let's say, they're all calculated the same. It's cost per square foot. Then there's some flat rates such as a plumbing or an occupancy permit built into that. That's standard whether you're a high rise or a low rise. To put it in perspective, does it hinder builders? Is it going to steer them away?
hinder is not the word I'm looking for.
What?
It's the cost.
So as an example, let's say you have a 500, 600 square foot condo, you're looking at an additional $200 to $300 per unit. If you're single family dwelling, they're larger, 2,000 square feet, let's say, you're an extra $500 per permit. This is just for building permit fees. This is not development charges, parkland, anything else, just.
I understand.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
so you said it's about $500 or $600 per condo unit, 500 square foot unit.
No, well, $200 to $300 per condo unit, because they're usually 500, 600 square feet. I'm just saying a one bedroom.
That's a small unit, but let's,
Small, but then the house, or obviously a house is much bigger, typically 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, much larger. That's
So-
the $500 one.
a 3,000 square foot house, 2,000, it's a 2,000 square foot house. What would the
That-
permit be?
Well, no, so with the 19% increase, it is an additional 500. So you're looking at about, I think we're at 5,000. Like, let's say, if my memory serves me.
It's in the report here, so this is an example of 2,000 square foot, 2,960.
So 2,960 to 3,520, an increase of approximately 560. So that's yeah.
So the builder gets charged that,
The builder gets charged that, yeah.
and that gets passed down in the price of that particular condo
Yeah,
or whatever.
yeah, the home sale price, so they would pick up, they
So-
build it into that, yeah.
So that's where my concern lies. Okay, now we're talking about increasing the price of a condo, which affects the market. So people are going to see another extra charge on top of their. I mean, everything gets passed down to the buyer. At some point, the user, the buyer is usually where all this cost ends up with. So is that going to be substantial enough to kind of discourage people from buying homes? That's where my concern comes from. Because, if the province and the feds are trying to create an environment where we can build more of these homes, and this comes into play, is that going to start discouraging people from buying? Because now the prices are gone up, or going to discourage the home builders from building, for that matter. That's where my concern lies. I'm trying to find the balance here where it can make sense to me. Is it a one-time charge? It gets handed down and that's the end of it? Or is that charge for a condo, for example, does it continue forever and ever in a condo fee?
One-time fee.
See where it gets confusing, but we need to understand that. There's a question in there somewhere.
You're asking, will it discourage buyers of a brand new house? My personal opinion, there's a bigger conversation, making housing affordable, which I understand. Would $500 turn someone away from a house? I think we're already at a point where these concerns are already existing. Just as an example, we're seeing a lot more renos and additions show up because people are not purchasing as much. But yes, I would say adding $500, I don't think is going to make or break a deal on a house. I don't think it's going to make or break the $900,000 average sale price in Grimsby. I don't believe that would be the case. And I think the bigger question is, if not that, then what? Do you have if not that, then what do we do? And I want to say that Grimsby has, we don't have a lavish department. Currently, there's 1 vacancy. We run a slim crew. Our numbers are steady despite the 85% decrease. It's a steady Grimsby, I think, is unique that way where we're situated, but there's a steady amount of work, and I think we're not asking for the moon. We're just trying to get current, and we're not trying to get expensive. We're just trying to hit the basics. So my question would be, if you don't raise it, then what? There's suggestions of this deferral. I think Chuck has worked with or something to that effect. You go back to legislation. It's very clear that building permits cannot be funded by the tax levy. So what is the solution? It is what legislation says, and it is we have to be cost recovery to be sustainable, not just for home builders, but for our industrial builders, our commercial, our home owners who are on their CPP trying to build a deck. Like, for us to defer in one avenue, then we're pushing it on to another sector. So if not that, then my question is, I haven't heard of any solutions yet, but I think I know the solution of cost recovery, and I think it works.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I want to make sure we do the right thing. And I don't want to see the town lose money. And we don't want to, we want to keep Paul and because he's doing a great job. But I mean, yeah, so this is just basically a cost recovery only. There's nothing else in there but cost recovery. And the cost of running the building department is what, mostly staff related, I would think.
Stephen,
You don't have to get into that.
Yeah,
I'm
keep
just assuming, okay, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. But now I'd like for you guys to respond to some of the questions and concerns they had to ensure we're all on the same hymn sheet here, because I think there seems to be a little bit of a difference in opinion and analysis. And I just want to make sure we cover that gap in there, and we all walk out of here tonight knowing exactly what it all means, so the council can make a decision at the next meeting. When Victoria brings the report.
Sure. If I may, why don't I suggest that we have the consultant respond first, and then I know Chuck had a couple additional comments, and if Mike wants to add anything else, we can do it that way, but perhaps just addressing the delegations first from the consultant would be a good first step.
Yeah, I just want to make sure the building industry is, and what you're suggesting, we're both understanding it. Because we don't want to lose money. There's no question about that. And they don't want us to lose money. And if we become more efficient, that probably could be good for them too. But I just want to make sure that we're all playing with the same numbers here. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to do my best to respond to the issues you raised, and then I will also do my best to respond to the issues raised by Mike and Chuck. And forgive me if I miss things. I'm happy to follow up if I do miss things. So I guess just first of all, just to be clear that if it wasn't already stated, the fees that we're talking about are there to recover the cost of the service, and that's it. In our view, without the 19% increase, a portion of the cost of that service will have to be funded from a non-fee source, and that non-fee source will be the property tax levy. So, to the extent that a significant amount of what the building division is doing is dealing with applications to renovate existing homes or build porches or enclosed pools. The cost of the permits associated with that kind of work, if someone comes in and wants a permit to build a porch or a deck, if at the current fee rates, a portion of what that permit cost would be funded by their neighbors rather than themselves. So that's sort of the framework under which we're operating here. If I may, Matt, just to be clear, the legislation doesn't require the town to have full cost recovery fees. The vast majority of municipalities in Ontario have or strive to have full cost recovery fees for this particular operation. Because it is very much a fee for service kind of thing. It's not like development charges. We've seen in recent, and Chuck alluded to it, there's been a lot of federal and provincial initiatives to try and reduce development charges. And I don't want to get into that this evening. That is a very different kind of charge framework than what we're talking about here, because here you're talking about the cost of an individual payer for a service that relates to their property. And so I think there is a distinction between when we talk about the impact on affordability. I think there is a distinction with what the province and the federal government are doing with respect to development charges and what municipalities are doing with respect to building permits. There's a very clear distinction between the two. Notwithstanding that this is part of the cost of development. I understand that. And I agree with Matt's point that, in isolation, a $500 increase in the building permit fee for a new single detached home is probably not going to deter somebody from building a single detached home in isolation. But I recognize that's in combination with a lot of other charges and fees. To some of Mike's points, I think the issue of, the building permit data that's been recorded in the past has been addressed. Just on the question of the reserve fund, I think it is the case that the town is using the reserve fund right now for the purposes for which it was set up. It has been and will continue to be drawing down the reserve fund through this period of time. But the point about it is not that it needs to use it and it's not using it. It is using it, but at a certain time you reach a point where you need to address the fact that it is reaching a point where it needs to be rebuilt again. And particularly when we're heading into we are in a slowdown right now, but we are planning for growth. That's one of the reasons why these provincial and federal initiatives are being rolled out right now, is because there is a plan to stimulate housing growth. Every effort we have is to make that happen. So I don't think we should be assuming that we're going to be in this stagnant situation for the next 5 years. So we need to be properly staffed. We need to have the right reserve fund amounts to cope with what is coming. Because if we don't, then we're not ready for it, and that's a separate problem. And then just in terms of, I suppose, Chuck's point, which is a valid one, which is why are fees increasing and efficiencies not being found? And I just wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, this is already a very efficient operation. In the context of other municipalities, 18% of indirect costs is quite low. So I just did a study in Markham for planning fees a couple of years ago. Their indirect costs are 25%, which means their sort of corporate overhead is much higher relative to the actual service than it is here in Grimsby. There are no costs being funded in other departments. So this is extremely unusual. In most places where I do these studies, a portion of the costs of the planning department or the public works or the fire department is being funded through these fees, because those kinds of staff get involved in the permit review process for various reasons, which Paul can explain better than I. Here, we are only funding costs of the full-time staff that are operating in the building division. So it is quite a lean operation. I think that that's reflected in the low fees that are currently charged, and the low fees, frankly, the relatively low fees that would be imposed under a full cost recovery scenario. So I did want to make that point. And I guess just the other thing about Thorold has not canceled its fee increase. It is simply, having worked on the study, as Chuck knows, it is holding a public meeting, and it has deferred a decision on an increase for the moment. So I just it's semantics, but I just wanted to be clear about that. Yeah. Thank you.
Mr. McShane, do you want to go up and speak? Go ahead.
Is that the right one? Okay. Thanks so much for some of your answers. I found something that was quite interesting, or a couple when I was listening to some answers. So when we're looking at permitting fees on condo buildings and permits for condo buildings, does each condo have a separate permit? in a building. Each condo, if it's a condo building.
So as we're describing table 2, page 12 of the report, 2015 to 2019, in a condo building, we were issuing permits per unit within the condo building.
Okay.
Okay?
Mhm.
So in order to find efficiencies in building permit process, we worked with builders. We said, do you want to apply for 200 permits at a time or do you want to apply for 1 permit at a time?
Okay, I get it. But
So anyways, to your answer, currently as of 2020 moving forward, yeah, it's 1 permit unless we phase it. We work with the builders. Sometimes it's 3 because we do foundation,
one
superstructure, et
full
cetera.
permit, but each one of them was broke down in the condo corp because each one of those units has to be covered by Tarion. Moving forward, each one has to be registered if it's a condo, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, okay, thank you for that. So the
problem.
numbers are a little bit skewed there. Second of all, the other thing I found quite interesting was when you said that decks, fences, residential landscaping projects are just as much work as a new home on average, why is the new home paying or the new home purchaser paying for the existing citizen to get their deck built? So the new home purchaser is actually, by what you had stated, is subsidizing the fees for the person who's building the deck. Because you said it takes just as much work sometimes to do a deck than it does to do a new home.
If you want me to, I think what Paul was saying is, if you look at the volumes, in order to process, the fees are relative to the workload that goes into the plan review, the admin, the inspections. I'd say obviously we're seeing a lot more decks. So depending on where we're at, pool enclosures, things like that. The volume is significantly higher than home builders. As I said earlier, I think the home building permit quantity is less than 10% of our residential building permits. So I think it's more
But how much
volume.
cost?
Volume. Cost, it's typically our minimum, like our minimum permit fee, but it's relative to the individual permit. But I think the workload, it seems, I understand where you're going with the subsidy perception. However, it's the volume of permits, which appear like it's a larger amount of workload because of the volume. But I'd say the fees are relative to the workload that goes into the individual permit.
Okay, that's not what I understood, so I apologize for that. But it still sounds to me that when we're talking full cost recovery, and this is what has been stated all night, and every one of these studies, and you and I have had these conversations, I haven't seen anything that provides me with a full cost recovery. Nothing that shows me a breakdown of time, what it takes to process a permit, what it takes to do such and such and such and such and such and such. And I do believe when you get a permit for a new building, is part of that fire inspection?
No, so in Grimsby, the fire department, I know in some municipalities, can you hear me? Can you shut me or mic off?
Yeah, I can hear him.
No, okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, in some municipalities across Ontario, the fire department does do services for the building department for plans review and inspections, but that doesn't happen here in Grimsby. So everything stays within the building department.
But there's the fire department, so who signs off on the fire approvals and all, like the sprinkler systems and all that and the building permit?
Yeah, we do, the building department. Once a building is occupied, then it falls under the Ontario Fire Code. The fire department does ensure that there's a fire safety plan and that kind of thing in place once a building's occupied. But as far as inspections, it's solely within the building department.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm just going to add one more thing. I did meet with the mayor and the CAO Thorold last week. Their permitting fees will not come to the table until either December of this year or January of next year. So,
Well, thank you for the information. You know more than I do, Chuck, is it? Thank you.
and that's all I'm asking for. For the town of Grimsby to be partners, to get more people in the homes, help keep the costs down, help move things forward, and defer this increase for a year. A 100 times 19% or 0 times 19% is 0. Let's work together and let's build some homes. Let's increase the property tax revenues. Can't forget about that. Somebody moves into a condo that's paid all the development charges and everything else, they're paying taxes right off the bat. So let's bump our industry. Let's get everybody to work. And let's make Grimsby grow and be the town that it can be. So I would ask that you would defer these charges until the beginning of 2026.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wanted to say anything? Any questions? Yeah. You mind if I let him speak and then you can, yeah.
I'll be 30 seconds. Just a point of clarity, just so it's crystal clear. We understand the Building Code Statute Act, that these are not to be funded from the tax levy. So to be crystal clear, and exactly Chuck's point earlier, we are not asking for a penny from the tax levy. There is a significant reserve. We understand that in 2026, you're dipping into the reserve already. We're simply asking for 1 year, or to Chuck's point earlier, get December, January into 2027, and hopefully we will be on our way out of this. And we have eyes wide open that there will likely need to be increases at that time. We're asking for a deferral or a pause to get through this period of time. Use the reserve, not 1 penny from the tax levy, and then we come back to this when hopefully we're on a better path forward. Thanks.
I've got a question for you, Mike, or just something for you to add. In short, we're only asking for the deferral of the increase. I'm not asking for a deferral of all permits.
Yeah.
Just the 19%.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Vardy.
Thank you. Excuse me. You know, in some ways, it's a little bit disingenuous by saying, well, we're going to defer it till December or January, because basically you're just kicking the problem down the road to a new council, because we've got an election in the fall. And, you know, if this is really cost recovery, nothing is going to change between now and, 7-8 months from now. There's still going to be a shortfall. So I'm not in favor of pausing, just, speaking out loud, but I do think we should do this incrementally. That's it.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we will end this public meeting. Thank you for coming. Thank you to staff and to Hemson for being here. And we appreciate the members of the public coming out and speaking as well. So thank you and have a great rest of your evening.